Hi, I'm Cecile, a Canadian living in southern Turkey. In today's conversation with an expat, we're talking with my dear friend Lisa, who just over a year ago packed up her life in Toronto and moved with her husband and two daughters to Spain. So, we're going to talk today about moving abroad for a gap year or a year abroad or a posting, whatever you want to call it, and some of the difficulties of that, as well as the wonderful ways their life has been enriched by living abroad. Enjoy.
Yeah,
So thank you again so much for doing this.
my pleasure.
I always love talking to you, but it's another excuse to talk to you. So
Yeah, we always have great conversations.
um, tell me where you're from and where you are now.
Well, I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. I grew up and spent most of my adult life in Toronto. And now I live in Sitges, Spain, which is just outside of Barcelona.
Okay. So on that note, do you consider yourself an expat? Tell us about what you're doing, you and your family are doing in Spain.
Well, those are two very different questions because it's interesting when you asked me that question to think about. I'd never considered myself an expat. And I'm thinking about it more, I think I have maybe some negative connotations around that word. I think
Sure.
my connotation around that word is like someone who decides to live and work somewhere else, but stay within their group of people. Like I
Mhm.
don't feel like and I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm just saying that I realized, like, once you asked me that and when I was really thinking about it, the word expat to me brings up a a you know well off or like retiree or English person living somewhere less expensive that's sunny. Like that's just the word that comes to my mind when I think expat,
Yeah.
and like expat groups, expat chat groups and whatever, and I think I also never really considered myself an expat because I think of an expat as someone who's in a more permanent situation. And I don't know what our situation is. So yeah, I mean, I guess I am, but I never would have said I'm an expat.
Yeah. So tell us then about your situation. Like, why are you in Sitges, Spain? How long have you been?
Well, about a year and a half ago, we decided to sell our house, our main residence in Toronto. And just because we felt it was a good time with the market, and we'd had it for 12 years and we were just ready for a change, but we didn't have a new house that we wanted to move into. And generally in Toronto, that's a place where you buy first and sell second because you want a place to move. And the market moves very quickly there in general. But we wanted to really change. We wanted to downsize. We wanted to realize some of the investment gains that we had made in the property market, and we didn't want to just buy a bigger house and put it towards something more. We actually wanted to realize some of those gains and downsize a bit. And so at that point, my husband said to me, well, you've always wanted to live abroad. You've always wanted to experience living abroad. Now's the time. And I initially put up some barriers to that. And I was like, oh, but the visas and whatever. And in the course of 1 2 hour car ride that we did in the car, we decided that it was possible and why not see if it's going to work. We initially looked at either Italy or Spain because we've spent some time in Italy and we love Italy. But we decided on Spain and this town particularly, because we had been here a few times before on a trip that I think I'll talk about in a little bit. So we had spent kind of 2 weeks here twice, and it felt like a home away from home. Every time we'd come back to Sitges, we'd feel like we didn't feel like travelers. We felt like this was a place that was very relaxing for us. And also we have friends here from Toronto. And so in terms of for the children, we have two kids, they're 11 and 13, and our friends have kids. And so we thought that would make the transition easier for them because they would already know someone. there was one of their kids goes to the same school. So we could pitch it as, Holly's going to be at your school. And so you'll already have friends there. And also my Spanish at the time was better than my Italian. And now it's much better than my Italian. And so I thought if you're going to live somewhere with a foreign language, probably best to live somewhere where to make the transition easier, where you already speak the language a fair amount. And you also have people who can help you negotiate the little things that otherwise would probably be a bit more challenging.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to just add before I move on, sort of about your history, so to speak, as someone living abroad?
Well, I was thinking about this as well, because why would I want to do something like this? What brought it into my head? And I actually think, and this had never occurred to me before, that it might go back to my 20s when I was working as an actor in musical theater, and I was touring with 2 different musicals, as well as working in regional theater in Canada. And so I would often live someplace for 3 months or 6 weeks. I lived 6 months in Chicago. I lived 3 months in Boston, 3 months in Los Angeles, 3 months in Prince Edward Island. And so I kind of had the experience of living places more than just kind of dropping in, seeing all the sights and leaving. And I think maybe that started to kind of feed my experience of why it's a more rich experience, in my opinion, to spend a chunk of time somewhere rather than just, see it and leave.
Yeah.
So I think that might have precipitated it. And did you want to talk about my trip now, or?
Sure.
So 4 years ago, I lost my mother after a very all too brief illness. And as you know, it was absolutely devastating time in my life. I still get choked up even saying it now.
Yeah.
And during that period, grief is it's not a process you can really explain to someone until they've been through it, I think, on a heart level. But nothing made me happy during that time. Nothing made me feel, everything was shades of gray is really the best way to explain it. My kids made me happy. My husband made me happy, my close friends. But other than that, I'd look around at all my stuff and the things in the world, and I was like, one of the only things that made me feel just like okay was watching shows like Escape to the Sun and Make a New Life on the Continent and House Hunters International. And I would look at these beautiful, bright, sunny seaside places and people, simplifying and starting anew. And there was something about that made me feel better. And I think part of it was that it was so different from my current experience. And also, like, looking at apartments on Airbnb made me happy. I could look at pretty places where I could go live with pretty views. And somehow, I don't even remember exactly how it came to be, but I got the idea to do a trip for 6 months. I knew I needed to get out of Toronto. I knew I needed to be somewhere, especially in the winter, where I could, we can all get depressed in the winter, but especially that winter, I knew was going to be really hard. And so I was like, I need to get out of Dodge. I cannot stay here. And thankfully, my husband was really supportive and encouraging, because if he wasn't, I don't think I would have had the resolve at that time. Wouldn't have had the strength to kind of push for it and fight for it, but he was really supportive. And so the initial idea was 6 months, 6 cities, because even then I felt like I didn't want to backpack. Like, I watched these people backpacking for a year with their 2 kids, and that sounded exhausting to me and not at all fun. It sounded very stressful. So I thought 6 months, 6 cities, so I could do those things that I love, which is sit down somewhere and have my regular place for coffee and my regular place for groceries and get a library card and feel just a little part of the community. For me, that makes the experience so much richer. So it started out as 6 months, 6 cities. And then once I got to Europe, I got a little greedy and also discovered that the Schengen visa is a real thing and you can't just ignore it. So I couldn't do it quite the way I planned, but we ended up visiting 11 countries in 7 months in the end. Our kids were 8 and 10 when we started, 9 and almost 11 when we finished. And we got to see so many different countries and spend months, like we spent a month in Mexico, a month in St. Croix, in the Virgin Islands. We spent a month in Florence. We spent a month in Spain, over a month in Spain, divided into different parts. We also came to Turkey to see you, which we never would have done in the past. It just wouldn't have, worked out. We went to Israel and Russia, which also would never have been on my original list because they felt different. And part of this trip was kind of about comfort. And so I was picking places that felt easier and more comfortable for me, like Italy and Portugal and Croatia, which we had been to before. And so we knew we loved Croatia and that kind of thing. So that trip ended up being a really interesting experience in stretching boundaries. And also I saw such a difference in my kids that they were more open, they were to experiences. They, at the beginning of the trip, it was, where's the grocery store? Where's the house? Where's the and I was like, I don't know. I've never been here before. We'll find it. We'll figure it out. And by the end, they were just really more chill about change and different experiences and stuff like that. And so when the idea of moving abroad for a year, which was a very different experience, came about, I knew that although of course there might be some resistance, perhaps, I felt confident that overall it would be a great experience for them because I had already seen the process of change through that 7-month trip.
So that leads me beautiful to one thing I've really been curious about, and I'd love to have you maybe address a bit here. So we can combine these or talk about these separately, but the idea of the biggest challenges that you and maybe your kids specifically too, or your husband too, all of you, biggest challenges you've faced, but presumably also overcome. But then also hand in hand with that, maybe your biggest aha moments.
Well, the challenges, have been there, but I wouldn't say they were significant. I mean, the initial challenge was my older daughter was at the time a preteen. Now she's a teenager. She was not thrilled with the idea of coming here at all. It took a process to get her there. My youngest was a little more open to the idea. Once we got here, and they got to the school, which they loved immediately. As a matter of fact, like literally after we visited the school a week after we arrived during the summer, my eldest was like, it seems like an awful lot of trouble to move here just for 1 year. I was like, nothing but argue. Literally, yeah. She was like, well, just 1 year doesn't seem enough. We should stay longer. And she even said, I know it's going to sound funny coming from me, which is why you kind of have to remember that that it's sometimes hard as a parent to put your child in a position where you know that they're going to be, and yourself in a position where they're going to be uncomfortable and resistant, and you're going to have to maybe feel that mommy guilt of, oh, am I dragging them away from their friends? Am I this? Am I that? But it seems like if you have the right attitude, they get to where they need to get to feel comfortable and happy, and that's certainly the case with ours. I would say that finding community was a struggle a little bit in the beginning. Because I think, again, like the expat thing, we didn't really necessarily find huge connection in the expat community, like some, but it certainly wasn't like, oh, we just slotted in and felt great. So we both wanted to find connection in the local community. And so I was able to join a local choir and meet local people. And I am taking Spanish classes. And so I took pottery. And so I am finding connection through that. But it took my husband a little bit longer, but now he's found that and he's great and he's really happy. And so that part I think was a challenge. And then lastly, the challenge of the coronavirus shutdown. That was a huge unexpected challenge. The kids were not allowed to leave the house for 6 weeks. They were not allowed to step foot outside our front door. It was the strictest quarantine in Europe, and certainly not more so than North America. They actually dealt with it pretty much fine. Their school moved online. We have two big terraces, so they could get air and light. And thankfully, we have this wonderful house half a block from the ocean. And so being able to see the sea during the quarantine was huge. I think we actually probably weathered it better here, even though it was a stricter lockdown than we would have in Canada, where it was, gray, still gray and cold. And I think that actually would have been worse, even though we would be able to walk around the block. I think light and air and sea views, personally for me, did a lot more for my mood. But that was a challenge because you then go, well, am I sentencing my kids to a stricter lockdown because I've decided to live in Spain rather than if they were in Canada, which now, given where we are now, I don't think that's the case. But at the time, we had no idea how long this was going to last. We had no idea. We were at the point where we were deciding whether to stay or leave for the next year. Originally, this was just going to be a year, and then we really enjoyed it and considered moving on. And so you're in this space where you can't move, you can't do anything. And then you go, well, what's school going to be like next year? Is school going to be better in Spain, or is it going to be better in Canada? We still didn't have a place to live in Canada. Like, it definitely made things, more up in the air. But I suppose from an aha point of view is when also my daughter got into a program at a Toronto high school that she really wanted to attend. And so we had been back and forth. But when we were thinking of going back, I definitely had that moment of, I had that feeling, it's like when you, that trick that you do when you're not sure what you want to get off a menu at a restaurant, and you get someone to tell you what, and if you're disappointed, then you know that that's the wrong choice. It was kind of like that. I was like, oh, I'm kind of sad that we're going back. I don't feel, because we had this great Spanish life, that we were really getting into the community and had a rhythm, and everyone was really happy. And then all of a sudden everything shut down, and I felt like our beautiful Spanish life was taken away from us. And the idea of leaving and going back to Canada would have felt so unfinished. It would have felt so like we had been robbed of our time here, and never got back to the things that were really making us happy on a day-to-day basis. And so that was another kind of reason to stay, was we didn't have the chance to continue to live those things that made us so happy, but being here.
So that was the end of part 1 with my conversation with Lisa. Before we continue with part 2, let me ask you this. Have you ever thought about moving abroad, but maybe you didn't feel you were courageous enough, you thought it would upturn your life too much, or you just were intimidated by the logistics? Let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear part 2 of this video, click on the link, and I'll see you in a moment.